Hey, everybody. Bobby Klink from Your Online Genius here for you. This week, as I mentioned last week in posts and in the end of last week's episodes, we're going to be talking about podcasting and legal issues that you need to think about if you're a podcaster. But before I do that, wanted to just remind you all who I am, what the business is about, and why you maybe should be listening to me. I am an intellectual property lawyer, but I'm also an online entrepreneur. I've been practicing intellectual property for quite a while now, and I have a special focus, and what I really concentrated on is working with online entrepreneurs and helping them understand the issues that they have and how to solve issues that are very specific to their world. Because it's a special world, and online entrepreneurs are doing a lot of things that other people aren't doing. And so other lawyers who concentrate, more broadly on entrepreneurship wouldn't necessarily understand issues like course creation and all these things and inbound marketing and all these concepts of how you online entrepreneurs are building your business. That's what I do on a daily basis to build my business, but it's also who I work with. So I get it. I understand it. If you start talking about HubSpot or ClickFunnels or EO Fire or any of the other things that kind of get thrown around in the world of online entrepreneurs, I get it. I probably read the book. I have probably looked at the software because I've looked at most all of them to try to figure out what's best for my business. So that's who I am. Your Online Genius is a company. The purpose of the company is to provide educational resources and scalable resources that make it affordable for online entrepreneurs who aren't yet to the point that they can afford to hire me at $500 an hour, which is kind of my rack rate these days. I mean, look, if you hire me, it's going to cost you 10 grand, kind of getting out of the gates no matter what. And that's pretty typical to get an overall strategy or to really think through problems. I mean, if you have a very discrete little issue, it won't be that much, but to really think through the broad scheme of protecting your business, it's going to be a 10 to 20 grand enterprise if you're paying a lawyer by the hour. And I get it. I couldn't afford that when I was starting out. So I understand why you can't afford that. So Your Online Business is my attempt to provide resources that are free, and then there's some paid. There's going to be a paid course down the line, but the idea is to provide scalable resources that I can offer to really help you solve your problems and do it yourself. That's the idea behind the business. So again, as I mentioned, we're going to talk about podcasting this week. It's a whole week dedicated to it and dedicated to the various issues. If you're seeing this, I recommend to you that you check out the blog post we put up. Put up a 4,500 word, blog post, about 4,500 words on our blog, which you can find at youronlinegenius.com/blog. And it goes through these things in depth. There's a chance to get a free checklist that'll help you make sure that you're thinking through these issues right. But again, I commend you to go there because there's no way I can really convey to you in these videos, and you don't have to watch them over and over again. But the blog post is really, truly evergreen, and you'll get all the information that I'm going to go over in these videos, plus a little bit more. Today, we're going to focus on kind of a first initial thing you need to think about in your podcast. It's not unique to podcasting, but it is something that can be a real problem. And that is choosing the name for your podcast. Now, if you are like most entrepreneurs, you spend a lot of time thinking about naming rights. You try to think about, hey, what would be a good brand? How would I really capture what I want? I mean, both so that people understand what it is, but also it maybe captures a little bit of my personality here, right? So it's not just, a dry, bland name. A lot of entrepreneurs will do a lot of things. They'll brainstorm, they'll spitball with other people, they'll run it past mentors, they'll run it past their current clients. They'll do all those things to come up with a name, and you might do that for your podcast. And that's great. Those are great ideas for how to do it and come up with good names from a business perspective, because look, testing, always a good idea. Getting other people, always a good idea. But you need to go a step further, and you need to make sure that from a legal perspective, choosing that name is not going to get you in hot water and isn't going to create a problem for you down the line. Now, what this means realistically is I have to ask you, did you check to figure out whether someone else is already or has in the past already used that name? And especially for a podcast. if you haven't done that step, you are exposing your business to a significant risk because, and this gets back to some basic lessons of intellectual property, the concept of trademark law. Under trademark law, the first person or company to go out and start using a brand name or a podcast name has the rights to it. They have the exclusive right to use that. And if you launch a competing podcast with the same name, guess what? They can complain because people are going to be confused about what it is. I use this in the blog post, but I like here to talk about a great quote from my favorite fictional race car driver, Ricky Bobby. If you aren't first, you're last. Not great advice elsewhere, but it is here. You have to be the first person to use the name or you're at risk. Now, let me give you an example. This is not a hypothetical problem. If you go on iTunes and do some searching, you'll find examples of this. But I lived through it. So about 2 years ago, before I had really started putting myself out there on podcasts and doing interviews with people, but I was doing some inbound marketing, some content marketing, and doing some interesting things in online entrepreneurship. Well, a guy came to me. He was a guy who had a kind of a turnkey podcast solution. He would charge something, I don't know, $3,000-$5,000 a month. He would do everything for me. I would just show up, do the interviews, and then they would do everything. They would find the guests, book the guests, do all the front end, do all the back end, do all the editing, do all the loading. Again, it was pretty expensive if you think about it, considering now you could find services, maybe not finding the guests, but everything short of that for a lot cheaper than that. But he was pitching this to me, and it kind of interested me because I listened to podcasts and I said, that might be a great way. I like talking, why not? But I wasn't sure, and I wasn't yet to the point that I think I was ready to make that commitment. But he tried to entice me. He said, hey, well, I've got some other podcasts. Why don't you come on to one of them as a guest? I said, sure, why not? I'd love to be interviewed as an expert. And so I went on to this show. I did the interview, as per normal, or as you normally do. Went out and bought myself a headset, which actually didn't work, and so I had to use just my normal iPhone headset. But now I've got a much better setup. But so I did that, and then I got an email some point later saying, "Hey, they've gone live." And so I was like, "Oh, great." The operation, again, this is part of why I probably didn't go with him as a service. He didn't provide me links to anywhere on iTunes, just provided me a link to like Apple News, which of course I could only access on my iPhone, and then I think to their website. But so I go on to iTunes, which is where I look for my podcast. And so I search for it, and I find not one, not two, not three, but 4 different shows with the exact same name. And oh, by the way, the one I was on didn't even show up. So there were at least 5 out there with this exact same name. When I found that, it kind of boggled my mind as an entrepreneur, because I was like, why would you want it to be the case that someone can't actually find my podcast? I want people who like me, who know me, who trust me, to say, hey, go find this podcast. And even if I don't give them a link, they can go search it and find it without a problem. But separate from that, I thought about it as an intellectual property lawyer. I was like, this is just insane. Everybody besides the first podcast to launch with this name is infringing the trademark. And what does that mean? What is the risk that's inherent in that? Well, the person who launched the first podcast would have the right to force the other podcast to change their name, to stop using the name. And again, it's even more complicated. In a normal world outside of podcasting, you would also have a right to say, hey, pull down all your infringing content. You can't use it. Take it off the internet. Again, I think you and I both know that's going to be a hard process with iTunes to get that off. But there is going to be some ramifications beyond that. So these later podcasts were running a risk that they were going to be forced to change their name. So I can hear what you're saying right now, because I get it. I can hear this, and I hear this a lot of times. Say, well, why don't I just take a risk? What's the worst that can happen? If they find out about me, great, I change my name. Well, the problem is, you don't know, you're creating this risk, building this time bomb into your business, and they're not going to come and make a demand at a time that's easy. You're going to get the demand from them at the worst possible time. See, when you launch, you're going to be launching to a small, engaged group of people. Again, I think, most of the statistics I hear from people who want to help you launch podcasts and get them on new and noteworthy is you only need, say, a couple dozen reviews. If you have a couple dozen people downloading consistently or subscribed and reviews, you're going to be on the new and noteworthy. So, when you launch, you're not going to have thousands of people downloading, again, unless you're someone who already has a huge brand. And so when you launch, you're going to be launching to a small, dedicated group of your followers. Those are not the people who are going to sue you for trademark infringement. So the problem is going to be the trademark owner is probably not going to know about it up front. And you're going to go about building your business. You're going to go about, putting out your content, putting in all this work, all this, sweat, all equity, everything into building the brand around this podcast, building the name, getting notoriety. And if you're good, you're going to get popular. And once you get popular, that's when they're going to find you. It's going to be once you've got the raving fans. And that's when you're going to have to take it down. And that's the worst possible time, right? I mean, at this point, you've gotten to the pinnacle, and then you're going to come down to the very bottom, because you will have to make the change at that moment. And you might ask me, well, is there any way around it? Well, not really. I mean, if you launch a podcast that has the exact same name as another podcast, they're going to have a pretty darn good time, argument that you've got to change your name. You can come to me, you can beg, you can plead, you can say, do something for me. And I can say, well, I think you're going to lose. I don't think you have much of a chance of winning, and it's going to cost you $100,000 or more to fight it. And so you're just not going to fight it. You're going to have to give up, and you're going to have to lose all the equity you built up. So that's why you can't use a name someone else has been using. So what do you need to do instead? Well, you need to make sure that the name isn't used. And there are 3 places you need to search. One, we've talked about iTunes. I mean, you got to make sure there's nothing on iTunes, because, hey, that's a quick and easy way. If you find something on iTunes, change your name, pick something different. But you also should search the United States Patent and Trademark Office. They have a place where you can look for registered trademarks. It's called TESS, T-E-S-S. And you can search for names and see if it's ever been registered as a registered trademark. But then the last thing I would do is search Google. Just see if there's other people in the same general industry, because even if they don't have a podcast, let's say they have an online entrepreneurship business with the same name, you could have a problem, because they can make an argument that, hey, people would see your podcast and think it's associated with my business, so they're going to have a pretty good chance of getting you to have to change your name. So you've got to search those 3 places. And if you find something close, candidly, you want to come pay me or pay some other lawyer to try to figure it out and try to give you an opinion about what your risk is, you can do that, but it's going to cost you a good bit of money. There really aren't that many names that are so great that they're worth it. I mean, if it was pets.com, it would have been worth it. But at this point, you're probably not launching with a name that is that perfect. And you have to be honest with yourself. Could you come up with another name that's just as good, or maybe, you think, oh, it's not quite as good, but it's within a couple $1,000s worth, so it's not worth paying a lawyer. So that's what I commend you to do. If you do that, you will know that at least with respect to this issue, you haven't planted a time bomb that could go off on you in the future. So that's my first piece of advice. Work on the naming. Again, that's today's lesson. Tomorrow we're going to be going into other issues, and we will the rest of the week related to podcasting. So if you are a podcaster, I commend you, come here at noon every day, and you'll get all these lessons. But also check out the blog post at youronlinegenius.com/blog. And the last thing I would say is, if you like this content and you want to go deeper with a deeper set of lessons about your overall business, I have a free 5-part course that walks you through the 5 biggest mistakes that I see online entrepreneurs making, and tells you what you need to do instead. And you can get that by going to mistakes.youronlinegenius.com. You go there, you can sign up for free. Just give your name and email address, and we'll start delivering those lessons to you. So that's all for today. I hope this has been useful, and I look forward to talking with you tomorrow.